There's an interesting thing around the role of regulation being both an impediment but also a driver for change, and a task that we as lawyers can contribute to is to getting it right, getting the right regulation in place, something that will drive, that will create a bit of pain to actually change something, but at the same time not be as complicated as to actually stifle development. An interesting example is around disclosures in relation to funds, because what happened in the competition between the EU and the UK was that the EU came out with a framework that was rather technical, that was very much drafted not so much from an asset management perspective, but very much focused on technical aspects and procedures, and the UK looked at that framework and how it was applied in practice and what the problems were, and created their own framework, the sustainable disclosure regime, and made it much more pragmatic, easier solutions, more investment strategy based, more based on the actual commercial thinking of investors. And now we're in a situation where actually the EU is considering to copy some of that when they're redoing their own disclosure framework. So we see a bit of competition between frameworks, but also a big learning aspect that people are actually willing, policymakers are willing to look across the borders of how others have done it. I don't think that a global taxonomy for real estate will work unless it is very generic. And we've seen that as an example with the green bond standards, which are often used for investments in real estate, where you have very generic principles of the types of projects you could be financing, which is not at all more in-depth as to the standards you should be applying or the types of procedures you should be going through. So that can work, but I'm not sure whether that's a framework that overall would meet the ambition to really make something more pragmatic, but also work in the real estate space. You need to take into account more how the built environment is in a place. And the taxonomy in the EU has been made to accommodate for the building sector in the EU, but it's very much based on standards, methods, materials being used in the EU. And it doesn't work in that way when it's being exported to other countries where the building standards are different, where also the requirements are different. You know, insulation is not a topic when you're building in India. It's rather the question of how to deal with heat. And what could potentially work is to have an overarching framework which then can be filled in life on a country or region by region basis. We have been talking about this for years, and the talking is very important, but let's get to action, as Cop28 says.